Hello there, friends. Andrea with the Bangs here. The following interview is with my friend, Rebecca Christiansen. Now, it is on the more informal side because Rebecca is a good friend of mine. I've interviewed her once before. It was the first time I had met her, actually. When I last interviewed her, we talked about her being an author, and we spoke about the feminine archetype. And that was a really, really fun conversation, and we've actually really hit it off as friends. And so it was a little bit less formal this time around, and it's fine to be less formal, I guess. I just wanted to, warn you. I don't know. Anyway, but it is a kind of serious topic. Like, we're talking about Ibram Kendi and his books. She wrote an article about him and the ways in which he is misrepresented, especially on Twitter. And to be clear, Rebecca is by no means a social justice warrior type person. She just is someone who likes looking at both sides. And, well, you know what? Watch the interview. You can let me know what you think. I'll let her explain herself. I really appreciate her perspective because she's trying to be quite honest and open to what she is reading in his books. So I guess that's all I have to say. And you guys can let me know your conclusions in the comments. If you're new, please do not forget to subscribe. Without further ado, here's Rebecca. Hello, Rebecca.
Hello, Andrea.
I need to come up with a better... I do this thing where every time I'm like, and we're starting. Hello, guest. And it's like, I don't know, I go into like elevator.
It's cute, I like it.
Voice. Yeah. Okay. Oh, okay, well, if it's cute, I'll keep it. I'll keep it then. Hello, Rebecca.
Hello, Andrea.
Okay, so like now it's serious mode. So here's the thing that's difficult for us. Because like we're friends. And so the formality is just like not even here. But we'll do our best.
It's okay.
I think once we get into the topic, the seriousness, we'll just kind of help to like take us away. But it kind of feels like the topic that we'll be going into. I feel like if you don't laugh, you'll cry. So we've got to laugh. So aforementioned topic. You wrote a little article about how it went reading. Okay, how do you say his name? Is it Ibram?
I think it's Ibram.
Ibram X Kendi.
Yeah.
People just say Kendi. You read his book, How to Be an Antiracist, and then you wrote about it.
Yeah.
Go. The interview. Okay, but let's go through a little bit of the article. So you give the before and why you decided to read it.
Yeah. Okay. It's in the intro to the article as well. I worked at a bookstore until late November. And after George Floyd was killed, we started to see an uptick in demand for anti-racist and like Black history books. Mm-hmm. And that happens with a lot of different social topics. Like every time there's an election, there's kind of an influx of books, or an important anniversary comes around, there's an influx of books. And that's just kind of how the book industry is. Mm-hmm. But usually these are kind of flash in the pan situations where the demand spikes, and it often spikes unexpectedly and we can't meet it. And then it goes off, and then we have books kind of hanging around forever. Mm-hmm. That kind of happens. But with the Black Lives Matter movement kind of not ever losing relevance throughout the remainder of 2020, mm-hmm. and even to now, these books just kept being popular until they were kind of some of the top selling books in the store, mm-hmm. which is really unusual for such a serious topic. Mm-hmm. So as I was working, I was constantly processing large quantities of these books, and you get curious. Everyone who works in a bookstore is a book person. Yeah. So like we're always picking up books, reading the backs, reading the front cover to each other, stuff like that. So Kendi has kind of 3 titles that are some of the biggest leading titles in that genre.
Mm-hmm.
So there's How to Be an Antiracist, which is his newest, Stamped from the Beginning, which is his big, like, National Book Award winning book, and then Stamped, which is a young adult adaptation of Stamped from the Beginning.
Okay.
And then he also has a kid's book.
Mm-hmm.
So he's kind of the author with the most titles in this genre.
Okay.
And I started to notice that he was kind of really, really hated on Twitter.
Especially in our circles. Yeah.
Yeah, in kind of centristy Twitter, I guess.
Centrist to the left and to the right, centrist Twitter. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. He was very disliked. And when that happens, I always ask myself why someone has that reputation. And especially with Kendi, I noticed that the same quotes were shared over and over, and they were always decontextualized. You would always just see like a screenshot of one or two sentences completely removed from all of their context.
And then this is what they are real quotes. But then it's also, this is what he believes. This is what he says, and this is what he believes. Yeah. Oh wait, let's read some. Let's read the most notorious. I think I screenshotted. Is that?
I know. It's definitely not screenshot. So screenshotted.
Definitely not. Okay, so but this crowd merely responds to his tweets or saves screenshots of quotes to post to their followers as an example of how awful this Kendi guy is. And the quotes did sound kind of bad, taken on their face. Here's one that makes the rounds with Kendi's critics. The only remedy to racist discrimination is anti-racist discrimination. The only remedy to past discrimination is present discrimination. The only remedy to present discrimination is future discrimination. It sounds like Kendi is advocating extreme affirmative action, even oppressing white people as revenge for the oppression done to Black people. But still, I couldn't shake my suspicion at this quote appearing constantly without any further context clues. And, speak of the devil, the author is here, so please continue with that thought, Rebecca.
Yeah, so it started to bother me enough that I wanted to read the book, which happens. I read a lot of books, so it was just kind of like, well, you know what, I'll shuffle it up in the queue. So I did, and lo and behold, a lot of Kendi's critics misrepresent the hell out of what he says.
Right.
Big surprise. Yeah. Wow, people on Twitter they
take things out of context.
Right.
What? So what are the main things? I kind of want to go through the content. This is going to be a bit of a, let's just go through your article and then we'll go beyond. So what are the things that you found to be the most surprising, like your little bullet points? What are the things that you found like, oh, this is why he's not what they say, I guess?
Yeah, well, he's very much about policy. He's not somebody who attaches personal blame to people or to groups.
Okay.
That surprised me. He's portrayed as somebody who is like all out racist against white people, hates white people, thinks white people are evil. And he actually writes about a time in his life when he did think that. When he was in college, he wrote a column at his like college paper that was like very inflammatory, and he took a lot of inspiration from the Nation of Islam, which are like a Black supremacist group who do have like really kind of scary views about white people. Same kind of thing that the KKK believes about Black people is what the Nation of Islam believes about white people. They believe that they're like an evil race created by like this evil scientist it's really weird. It's like an evil scientist who created this race to be the most supreme evil race and stuff. So he was into that stuff in college. And his editor at his college paper called him out for it. And he had a slow kind of evolution to realizing that white people are people who have individual beliefs and who aren't this just evil horde who hate Black people.
Right.
Blanket.
Because
Blanket
he
hate.
has a bit of a memoir along with the polemic you said. It's yeah, so it's a bit of a story of his life.
Incorporates a lot of his personal stories, and so it's part kind of dry fact and part memoir, and it merges the two like really beautifully. Like he'll tell a story about his life, and then he'll kind of do a chapter break, and then the next bit will be about like the actual fact that influenced that story. So he kind of grew and realized that the problem isn't endemic in white people. Like white people aren't evil as a race.
Right.
It's just that historic racism still exists in policies created by old like racists. Right. So the racist ideas that affect Black people today exist in like government policy and institution. So that was really interesting. Like that's not something that people attribute to Kendi at all. People kind of paint him as this blanket racist against whites. But his ideas for attacking racism are very much like find a policy that has a negative effect on Black people, fix it, examine the results, and then go on to the next thing. So it's actually a very surgical approach, and he relates it to cancer treatment because he had cancer, his wife had cancer, and his mom had cancer, all within the space of a couple of years. So that was a really interesting part of the book where he detailed like all of these cancer treatments and then how they came to influence his like view of racism. That was a really interesting part of the book for me.
Well, it's because it's showing him as a human being and who has a wife, who has a mother. And it just does sound really reasonable. I mean, you could argue with his policy stance, but it's the with regards to his stance on people being individuals and not giving white guilt, assigning white guilt to white people. That's very reasonable that he like we agree. Right?
Yeah, and there are paragraphs of that book like so when I was in kind of the last chapter, I realized I hadn't really made any notes, and there were so many like paragraphs and lines that were like really illuminating to me, like on a sentence level, and I was like, oh man, I didn't like mark any of those. So I actually spent like 2 hours one night just going back through the book and kind of scanning every page and marking every line. And yeah, and like there were some parts of it that you would think would come from somebody like Coleman Hughes or like some kind of more centrist to right-leaning
John
person,
McWhorter,
like
or
there's
Thomas
whole parts of it that like if you didn't know Kendi had written it, you'd be like yeah, I totally agree. But because people are so focused on ideology, I guess, like they can't detach him from this like straw man version of anti-racism.
This is what you are. Right. Well, you know what it reminds me of? It reminds me of people who are defenders of Jordan Peterson. When they're like, he's not a white supremacist. He's not a radical. He's not how you're describing Kendi is how you could just switch out the names and it sounds like the way you're trying to be like, hey, well, he's not what you people have painted him as. And it just sounds like he's been oversimplified and strawmanned is actually what it is. Why is that? Why do you, because he doesn't subscribe to the white guilt and to the or to the power dynamics of with regards to can you go over
the
that
powerless argument? So something you hear from kind of like Twitter activists a lot is that Black people can't be racist because they don't have power. And a lot of people agree with that, but Kendi doesn't. And he says that like if you strip the responsibility of power from Black people who actually hold power, like if you say that like Clarence Thomas, the Supreme Court justice, doesn't have power because he's Black,
or like, Obama when he was in office, both terms. Yeah.
Yeah, or Obama. Like, so if you have this idea that Black people can't be powerful or can't wield institutional power, you're basically just making an excuse for every Black person who is in power who doesn't, who doesn't do what they should be doing.
Right.
Like, it, it's actually a very interesting argument because it's so rampant, the idea of powerlessness. But like, what are you doing if you're saying that Black people who get to that point, and there's not a lot of them, like, sure, like, I fully agree that like there should be more Black Congress people and there should be more Black Supreme Court justices, but for you to say that the ones that there are don't have any power, like,
That's
it practically doesn't hold
yeah,
water.
that's kind
It's
of
not true.
keeping all power away from Black people forever then. Yeah, yeah. So yeah, so that's interesting that he believes that. And then the other thing that I found very interesting, this violent crime statistic. Do you want to talk
Yeah,
about that
right.
one?
Yeah. So, it is true on paper that that Black men commit more violent crime than white
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
men. But when you control for unemployment, so when you take unemployed Black men and unemployed white men, the discrepancy like disappears.
So unemployed young
So like
men get into trouble.
commit more violent crime than anybody. So I feel like that's a statistic that not enough people know.
I didn't know it.
You see a lot of people
It's
talking
a
about.
very important discernment and distinction. Okay, so that I just wanted to go through a couple of the points like that you brought up that were interesting. Those are the ones that stood out the most to me as a sort of this is why he's not what you say he is. Now let's go back to why do you think he is this caricature so easily? Some people read it. I bet Coleman Hughes read the book.
Yeah, I think he reviewed it.
So why do you think he's painted with such an unforgiving brush?
Without referencing any specific people, because I don't know if I could speak on why Coleman Hughes would represent him a different way, or John McWhorter, or what I think it's a symptom of an issue that I see a lot, where people who have only ever had one opinion, like people who've never switched ideologies, like I've switched ideologies, I've been the polar opposite of myself at times. People have different ideas of what words mean. I see this all the time. So take the word anti-racism. People on the left, there's no way that they would ever disagree with just the word anti-racism. And there's no reason that anyone should really, like, the word anti-racism, like any sane person should be anti-racist. But if you kind of live in this centrist or right-leaning world where you've seen people that you don't believe to be racist called racist, it becomes a scary word for you. And people who are on the left who have never been more centrist or more on the right don't understand that. And people on the right sometimes don't have the bird's eye view of their own worldview. Like they can't really recognize when they're blowing things up into straw men.
Okay.
So if in their point of view, if their friends are always called racist and they don't think their friends are racist, anything called anti-racist is going to seem like an excuse to persecute their friends. So
okay, so it's like, oh, you're saying that I have to be perpetually engaged in this particular act of anti-racism. I can't just like that's the vibe I got when I first heard anti-racism was that like you have to be engaging in anti-racism. It's an active process. It's not passive. You can't just exist as you.
Yeah.
That's what I got in my centrist space.
Yeah. Yeah, and that's partially true, but it's also just like, it's not that you have to go out and join BLM rallies and like protest for things and boycott things. Like, that's not what anti-racism is. It's fortifying institutions against racism. So, like,
to do with policy, like rather than individual action.
It's more to do with policy. Yeah. So, like, a racist policy is like something like voter ID laws is a pretty racist policy, and like gerrymandering and redlining, like those are racist policies. And an anti-racist policy would be a policy that's fortified against racism. So like it can't enter it because the policy is built in a way that it just can't sustain racism. So he says there's no such thing as a non-racist policy, because a non-racist policy, like a policy that actively tries to be colorblind, because it's not fortified against racism, it will allow racism.
Okay. So that's actually the part where I was like, I don't know about that. To be like just upon reading your article about it,
yeah,
because I don't know that every single possible racist scenario can ever be. I guess maybe with an algorithm on a computer, maybe someday. So that's where I'm like, I don't know that that's possible. We can try our best. So why isn't that just what everyone's doing anyway? There's that. So that's kind of my question. Are we?
Yeah.
Well, so how is it racist? So wait. So if you're not being anti-racist, you're being racist. That's the.
It's not that you're being racist, but you're not building up a fortification against racism.
Then why not? Okay, then what about the other isms, like sexism and like ageism or ableism? Like, could you not say, well, then you have to be thinking about all of those as well? Is that?
Yeah, you could. Depends on the policy. Different policies are going to affect different groups differently.
So with any one policy, so that's why. Sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off.
No, it's okay. But like take like voter ID laws. Black people are much less likely to have the proper ID needed to vote. They're much more disenfranchised as voters. So I am of the belief that voter ID laws are racist because they have been implemented in the past specifically to disenfranchise.
And that's important, right? Looking at the history of a law. Because did he say that, like outlining, let's look at the root, like when he talked about the cancer cell thing, is like, where did this come from? Yeah. So I would almost say maybe because I just read your article and not his book, certain policies, when we look back and we see like the Jim Crow style, Black people are freed. Well, let's make it real hard for them to own land, like if we can
they can't sit at the counter. How about they have to sit in a designated area of the bus?
Yeah, they're allowed on just in a certain spot.
They can't live here. This is our neighborhood.
Exactly. Yeah. Here's zoning law. It's just zoning. It's not whatever. So
we just want to keep this area nice.
Yeah.
Nice and clean.
Oh gosh. Oh, this is Rebecca. We're getting too deep into the mock racism stuff. But like that's true. So going backwards to see like, clearly this is a vestigial racist policy that's not meant to be racist necessarily now, but was. Yeah. So there might be laws. I can't think. Well, I don't know. Like don't hit pedestrians. That law might not be racist in its origin. Yeah. So that's where I'm saying some things might not even have to do with racism at all. So I'm just being a little bit like, okay, well, technically, not all law. Like maybe I'm being a bit, what is the word? Like kind of like.
Pedantic?
Yeah, a little. I'm just kind of nitpicking and like pedantic and whatever that is. So maybe that's not what I should be doing. But I know everyone's going to be like, why didn't she challenge her? But I do want to know, because I actually am wondering like, well, wait, what about like this? So and
that's not a kind of like line that Kendi pursues in the book. He doesn't ever say like carrots are racist. or carrots are anti-racist. Like, it's not that granular. It's literally about, like...
Well, and that's why the policy, like, that's why I'm like, okay, like, don't hit pedestrians. Yeah. That's a policy, right?
Yeah.
I don't even know if that's...
Don't hit pedestrians. I'm sure that would be an anti-racist law.
Because everyone remember that in common, it's like, oh, include like black or white, don't hit people. See, and that's where that's where the anti-racist word, that's confused. That it is confusing, because that's confusing to me to be like, oh, okay, I just thought it was a good law. We must call it anti-racist, and that's where I'm getting a little bit into the weeds. That's what I was looking for.
Yeah.
And it might be a little bit semantics of language of like, oh, must you use that word? And then that's where he, I guess, would have to defend why we must.
Yeah.
That's why I guess I should.
Well, that's another thing that, because like, I can't speak for him.
Right.
I've only read his book. So like the reason I wrote the article's titled "In Defense of Reading the Damn Book."
Yes.
Because like your whole viewpoint can totally change when you actually read someone's book. But something that I see with Kendi in particular is that like he's a scholar and an author who produces the written word in forms of columns and books. Mm-hmm. But I see a lot of people online like demanding that he debate people and being like, debate John McWhorter, debate Glenn Lowry, debate Coleman Hughes. And he doesn't, because that's not his medium. Like, he's not a debater.
Oh.
That's not like how he chooses to spend his time. So it's like a weird like group of people are demanding that a writer express themselves in the way that's pleasing to them.
Right, because the IDW space is a very online and discussion. Like this, like honestly, like this is kind of along that genre, right? This chat right now. Yeah.
Yeah, it's very like verbal discussion based. Mm-hmm. And that's not how he expresses himself. Mm-hmm. So it comes across very entitled to like demand somebody use the medium that you find the most pleasing in order to engage with their ideas. Mm-hmm. Like it's very like entitled and demanding, I think. So it just always bothered me that these people will not consider his ideas unless he expresses them in the medium that they like.
Oh, so you're like, read the damn book.
Yeah, like he wrote a book. He wrote a book on the topic. Maybe that's what you should check out. Like that's his expression of his points. Mm-hmm. That's like the text that he wrote and revised and edited and published and put out there. Like that is the like Plato's form of his ideology. Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Like that's what you should look at.
So okay, so I mean that's a good point, and I think that hopefully if
like he literally wrote a book on the topic.
Yeah, he wrote the book. So hopefully people see this, like just that's why he's not debating people. But the reason I think people look to certain figureheads for what should I think about this? And I remember even talking with Liam Kofi Bright from Twitter. I spoke with him about our discussion on Letter and I'm like, oh Liam, I still haven't finished reading the material you sent me. Because another friend of ours, Aaron Rabinowitz, made the comment, people ask for sources. Where are your sources? But then they get the sources and they don't read them. And so I remember him telling me that, and I was like, I've got to read the stuff Liam sent me in our letter conversation because I don't want to be those people. And
when people ask for sources, they're not asking for... They don't want to see like the rigorous scholarship behind your ideas. They're looking for sources that they can discredit.
Right. Okay. Right.
When
right.
they ask
right.
that question,
okay.
They're looking for a journal that they can say, oh well.
Oh,
you know, like
I'm so naive.
Like,
I actually was like, oh, because they just want to know where is this coming from? I didn't think it was
Yeah.
the other way
And like
around.
the best of them would, and like you'd hope that they would, but I think a lot of people just ask that because they're looking for reasons to discredit what the person's saying.
Okay, well, we'll see if my train of thought still holds, so you can let me know. So I mentioned to Liam, I still haven't finished reading the sources you sent me because it's just, and this is not the same as Kendi's book. Kendi's book is marketed to like the masses, and this was theory, and this was theory that that Liam sent me, and I was like, I still haven't read it because it was just really hard to get through, Liam, and he was like, oh yeah, like I don't blame you, and but Aaron said, he's like, yeah, but Aaron's a scholar himself, like he's like, I don't blame you for not being able to get it is thick and convoluted and wordy, and so not to say Kendi's book is, but like I'm just saying, like I remember Liam said that to me. So in general, people on Twitter look to their figureheads. What should I think about this? Because I don't A, have the time to decipher, or B, want to.
Yeah.
And I don't blame them because life is busy. So they do. And I think I almost want to give them, I don't want to say credit, but like give them a bit of, well, I do that too. Like I do what they do.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't because I'm nice on Twitter. But I mean, personal belief, like I might think, oh, I guess that Kendi guy's one of them. I don't talk about it. But I just was like, I just put him in the, the social justice left warrior type category and just moved on. Where others just do the saved quotes and then tweet those out. So it is like I have other books I'd rather read that are on the list that I've been meaning to read because we're not all wonderful readers like you. So that's one of the reasons why I think people have maybe the wrong idea, because they look to these particular people who have read him, and I think have read him, yeah, and then it gets disseminated. So I don't know what I'm even asking, because it's like, how do we stop that? I don't know.
Yeah, I don't think we can stop it, but I think what we can do individually is not comment on things we haven't researched even a little bit. Like I would way rather somebody say, I'm not going to read that book, maybe I'll just read his article, or maybe I'll just comment on the way he tweeted this. I would way rather that than somebody making grand statements, judgments on absolutely no reading. Like I would way rather somebody just file him away in the back of their mind, or file anybody away in the back of their mind and just not comment if they don't know anything about what they're talking about.
Oh, so what I do? Yay!
Yeah. Yeah.
Yay, pat on the back for me.
Because I honestly think misinformation is like a huge problem on the internet.
Fake news.
Like the amount of people who know next to nothing and will make like this whole Wall Street bets GameStop thing is a huge indicator of that, because there's so much information. People know nothing about stocks or Wall Street or anything, and they will make pronouncements and people will act on it, and people are losing tons of money. And I'm not even just talking like dipshits on Twitter making comments. I'm talking they're like content creators who are like, they're leftist content creators and they're conservative content creators who are commentating on this issue, and people are making financial decisions based on their advice when these people know absolutely nothing.
Oh, it's just hot takes. So, they're just like, oh, this is the latest, like that.
Yeah, and when it's in the financial realm, it has real consequences. And I feel like the consequences just as real, or like a current events topic, but we don't see the effect as much because there's no money at stake. But when there's money at stake, like there's people losing tens of thousands following their content creators who are misleading them. And I just think that's really bad, and we don't have a way to kind of deal with that.
Right. So if people who are the leaders in these groups maybe started doing this, the thing that's hard is like what if they actually, like, I mean, I didn't read Coleman Hughes's review of Kendi's book, but if he thinks that for real, he thinks the things he wrote in the article, that's what gets sent around Twitter. He can't be like, oh, well, I don't, he's like, well, I thought those things, so I can't like censor myself.
Yeah.
So
yeah,
that's sort of difficult if, because you say that you don't think it's as, that he's a white racist, the way that people like, again, I don't know how it's been disseminated through the masses from what the original people who people look to, what they said.
Yeah.
But if he thinks
I honestly
those
think
things,
that people who are taking their opinion from those like thought leaders, if they're accurately interpreting that opinion, that's fine. Like there's lots of people with good critiques, and like it's good to have good critiques. Like good critics are like a service to us all, but it's the people who don't even do that. There are people who literally will like read 3 quotes from Kendi and take a look at him and decide all kinds of things about him. Like there's an element of racism in that as well, because like someone like Robin DiAngelo, like I think her ideas are kind of silly, and I've read some things about her practices that are
no one really like on both sides. No one really like loves her.
No one likes her, right? Yeah, but I feel like everyone can just kind of be like, okay, Robin, and like set her aside, but like she's a wealthy white woman, and it's funny to like make fun of her because of that. But I feel like if she was black, she would be a much bigger figure for, like, a much bigger target for outrage.
Really? Okay, well, I know because she was part of the whole Evergreen thing, so I saw a lot of like real like hate against her. When she hit mainstream, it was more jokes. And so I definitely saw the share of like, oh, look what she did, like basically. So I saw that I did see a lot of it, but I guess you're right. The fact that when she hit mainstream, it turned to jokes is kind of maybe poignant.
Yeah, and it turned to like, okay, white lady, like, which is like a way, like that's not a harmful joke to make. Like you say like, okay, white lady, and just kind of set her aside.
Well, okay, yes. And so if she was black, then it would be like she's so hateful.
I think, yeah, and I think she would be seen as like more of like a reverse racist, or more of a shrill, loud, angry person. I just think all kinds of stereotypes would be piled on her.
And people like think of her, I think that she seems more radical than Kendi does from how you described him. And
yeah, I think she is. And like that's just kind of like crazy and not quite as and not like rooted in reality. Like Kendi is very thorough about basing things on facts and research.
Do you think that people are more hateful towards Kendi than they are towards Robin DiAngelo?
I think so. I think they are. And I think the level of misinformation is a lot higher, because like I think Robin DiAngelo, like once you've seen a couple clips and you've seen like Benjamin Boyce's documentary videos, you kind of like see her for what she is. And I don't think people need to lie about her. But I mean, maybe that just shows that Kendi's more onto something. Maybe he just threatens people more. Maybe people see Robin DiAngelo as so silly that, you know.
If they engage Kendi, you might have to agree with him. And that's kind of scary. I'm not saying this as someone who is like saying it lightly. Like it is a
Yeah.
Okay, so one of the
there's more to contend with.
it's what?
There's more to contend
Well,
with.
inside you, right? Like there's a part where it talks about this is the part that I felt the most internal pushback inside for me. Something about how if a policy, I think it was actually the one we talked about how oh no, it wasn't. It was there's no acting black. There's no blackness. And then he kind of
there's no black
behavior. And then he kind of ended also like he ended it in a way that was balancing it out by being like, and the same way there's no white gene, that's evil or whatever. And so that was like balanced in that. However, I know there like I'm gonna bring up Coleman Hughes as on Coleman Hughes's discussion with John McWhorter. Well, they talk about this book called Acting White, and there's this thing again. This goes back to the whole integration of schools that you also mentioned, that he mentioned in the book.
Yeah.
That actually MLK was not necessarily for integration in schools because like we can't trust people to teach our children and care about them who don't see them as equal. So that to say, there's that background there, but Coleman was called all the time how he's like, are you trying to be white? When he made good grades. And there's a history there, of course. There's a whole history about why don't even try in school if you're black, and that's like acting white according to the black community, again, because of the history there. So is there not also a counterpart to acting black? Like is that racist to think of on either side that exists? Or black culture?
Yeah.
Like they're very proud of their culture, aren't they? Like in a way that like this is ours. We created this, we own this. So there were some things that I don't know about, and what can I say about it? I don't know. I'm a white girl. So that's we're a couple of white girls. So that's what I didn't, and I know he meant it in like the negative context of like, you're acting black in this negative way, but there's like positive ways of like quote unquote acting black, and as well as from what I thought, like black culture wise. So what does he talk about that at all?
Yeah, so it's really interesting. The book starts with a story of, I believe he was kind of in his last year of high school. He got chosen to represent his school in this like statewide speech contest, and it was kind of a funny story because he didn't want to do it and his friend encouraged him to do it, so he wrote this speech and he won their school's competition even though he was late. And like it's just this funny like story of how he's on the stage at this like really big speech competition, and at that point in his life and like what he wrote the speech on, he wrote it about how there's bad stuff in the black community that holds black people back. So his speech was very much like, we have to stop selling drugs, we have to stop getting pregnant before we're married, we have to stop doing this and this and that, and then we can like raise up in society, because if we don't fix our own behavior, then we can't progress and be seen as more and all this stuff. And like he remembers looking back on that speech, he's like, oh my god, I was perpetuating like every racist talking point of like conservatives on Fox News, and people were eating it up. Like his parents loved it, the audience loved it.
Was the audience like a black audience, or
it was like a mostly black audience? And it was in this like big black church where they did this speech competition. But his speech, like when he looks back on it now, he's like, oh my god, I was regurgitating so much like harmful stuff I was told about the way black people act and how it's on them to kind of raise their own status in the world. And like that's what he means. He means like there's nothing that Black people do that white people don't also do, but experience different effects. You know, like white people also get pregnant before they get married, and white people also sell drugs and do drugs, but the system is just so unequally weighted. So it's really not fair to say that like this behavior is what holds Black people back, because the same behavior doesn't always hold white people back.
Okay.
So really it's not the behavior, is it?
Okay,
Right?
because you could have, if you get pregnant and you're in a white family, even if it's not necessarily middle, or you could even be in the like lower class, but you could, because of whatever family history and inheritance laws and whatever place that you area you live, you might have more family support and space for family to help aid you. Just as all these hundreds and thousands of factors that go into why you are in the place that you are, and then these other factors of like, well, these people were descended from slaves, literally that results in where they are now. So like that
he talks about how the average what's the word, net worth of a white person in the US is something like, it's like in the 30,000s. It's like 35 to 37,000. The average net worth of a Black person in the US is $0. Like that alone is like crazy. Like if you're white, you're much more likely to have grandparents who owned a house.
Okay.
And that alone, like that means your parents probably own a house because they had that little bit of a leg up.
Invisible factors, yes. Like, you mean you could look to the house as like a clear indication, but there's just lots of factors as to why someone who gets pregnant, who's in, like, there's white trash. Like, come on. Wow, I'm gonna change that. There are white people who are, how do I say it?
Disadvantage. Yeah, well, it's the same kind of thing, but like there are totally white people in the same situation. Like my parents had not much of a leg up at all. They got up a little bit. Like I'm still young, so my potential is still like, I still have potential ahead of me. Like I'm not doing well now, but you know, like 10, 20 years, the story will hopefully be different. But like with somebody whose Black parents grew up under Jim Crow and whose parents lived through that time as well, did like maybe a little better, but like if you're white, the odds are so much better that you came from more.
Right. Okay. So I think that the history, because I'm a history person, I think that the history of looking into factors as to why someone is in the space that they're in, their family background, is very important. But I'm still actually wondering about the Black culture thing, and how like that's something that like that's theirs. Like we wouldn't, it would be inappropriate to say, well, there's no such thing as that. Like white people can claim rap culture in the same way that like Black people can. Like, well, no, we've got Eminem. Yeah. Okay, I'll give us that. But that
we got
and we've got Weird Al. Amish Paradise, don't forget. Oh my gosh! Oh, this is the worst. I'm the worst. But I.
He's a genius.
Does like acting? But like does Mike? I feel like I don't have the right words. Okay. Does it make sense, my confusion about, like, I get why it's not fair to be like, oh, acting Black and you're acting Black because look at the things you're doing, these like sort of stereotypes. But what about the good parts of like that came out of, I don't know, like rock and roll, like the blues came from that, and then as a result of that combining with other things like rock and roll, you know, like music, you know, like that is, you can trace that back to a specifically the Black community, and it's actually racist to not point that out, to be like, no, this is Black, you know? So what about that? Is that a different thing than he's talking about, though?
No, it is a different thing. Yeah. He's talking about, like, behavior and choices. Like, I read a really interesting quote today on Twitter, and apparently it's from Little Fires Everywhere, the series, where someone said, I'm paraphrasing, you didn't make good choices, you had good choices. Like, the options you had to choose from were all good. So, like, it's not that you are the supreme god of making good choices. It's that, like, you had good choices to choose from. And some people, all of their choices, like, all of their options are bad. Maybe some are less bad.
Okay.
But yeah, I thought that was a really, really good quote. And the author of Little Fires Everywhere, Celeste Ng, she popped in to be like, this wasn't in my original book. This is definitely from the TV show, just to make sure the right writers get credit.
Cool.
That was really
that's
cute.
Cool.
But yeah.
Okay, so I actually remember speaking with Rock about this back last year, and he mentioned this in a way, and he actually, back when he had a podcast, he said that he did an episode called Black Privilege, but it's about how you have to try harder, but then you're better for it because you're like, look what I did. Look, I did this because I had to try, whereas, you know, the white counterparts don't have to try as hard.
Yeah. And that's something interesting too, that, like, the advice that, like, I as a, like, left-leaning person would give to a person is not the same as, like, the analysis I would make of, like, the society. And, like, people like Vosh talk about this. Like, Vosh is a, like, communist, but even he says,
how
that,
dare
like,
you?
I would never
how dare you bring up a communist? No, just kidding.
He's my boy. I love him. But, like, even he says, like, I would never tell somebody that the system is against them and that they're oppressed if they came to me for advice in their life. Like, I would never tell somebody, like, oh, well, you know, like, the criminal justice system is against you, so you should just, you know, give up, I guess. Like, I would never ever say that. I would give, like, a conservative sounding talk about, like, oh, you know, you got to pull yourself up and you got to work hard and all this stuff.
Personal
like,
responsibility.
Interpersonal stuff. Yeah. Interpersonal, like, advice and, like, narratives are totally different from, like, societal analysis.
That's so okay. Micro versus macro. That is huge, because the things that we were talking about, like, if you are descended from slaves as opposed to being descended from immigrants who came over with less than $10 in their pocket, even, like, that is amazing that they did well, like, mind you, but it's like the slavery space was, oh no, we still don't like you and want to hold you back with these policies, and there were some immigrants actually that, like, weren't wanted actually in the United States who did have a harder time, but still it's looking back at the history and then looking over large bird's eye view at the whole thing versus, like, oh, individually, you know, if you had a hard life and you're white, I don't think that's what we're saying, that, like, oh, it wasn't that hard because you weren't a person of color.
Yeah, no, nobody has a monopoly on human suffering. Right. Like, human suffering is rampant, and, like, even rich people go through, like, horrors that you couldn't imagine. Just think of, like, any celebrity who goes on, like, a drug bender and, you know, ends up in rehab and stuff. Like, doesn't matter where you come from in society or where you end up, like, people are suffering on massive scales. It's just so different how that suffering comes about, and we can't fix some of it unless we address things on a policy level. Like, you can give as many inspirational speeches as you could. Like, you could go hoarse every single day giving speeches about how to improve your life, but there's policies that are actively holding people back. So, like, it's just a matter of scale and, like, utilitarianism.
That's it. Solved. No, it's good. No, it's. I think that's a good spot because, again, we have to talk about these things that are maybe a little uncomfortable, a little bit difficult, and also just like understand that the difference between like macro policy, large scale versus micro, which is like individual level things, and to not take it personally. And I think that's one of the biggest things that's been helpful for me to get over, but I'm not racist. Like, that's how it felt a couple years ago. Yeah. Learning about the like different housing laws, whether that is rooted in like vestigial racism, and I'm saying vestigial because I think it, you were saying how difficult it is, these different like words that sound intense, like the policies that were historically racist and that were tried to be fixed but weren't fixed enough, and the sort of education system and how certain zones of property taxes is that decides who gets what in the education funding from that state and that county, and
well, you know what's really crazy? I had to look on that topic of schools. I had to look this up for a Twitter argument that I was in.
Yes, the best reason to look something up.
You're really motivated. Yeah. In the US, schools are funded by like local property taxes. So like if a school is in a bad neighborhood and everyone around it is poor, that school's going to have no money. Very, very little funding. Whereas like the next kind of neighborhood over is full of rich people. They're going to have a rich school with tons of funding. And like that in itself is like the seat of so much inequality. And then so for my research, I looked at how schools are funded in Canada, and it's a little bit different from province to province, but in BC, every school, 80% of every school's budget is the same based on like the school size.
Okay.
And then like 10% is based on if they have a lot of ESL students or special needs students. And then 10% is based on something else, like individual needs of the school itself, like the building. And like, that's how it's done. So like most schools are funded almost the same.
Right. That sounds much better like, to me.
Right? Isn't that just logical? Like, how about we just give all the schools the same? Like, it makes so much more
We're sounding
sense.
like we're communists now. Each according to his need.
Each school according to their need.
Are filthy socialists. Ugh. No, but that is an issue that I do think needs to be addressed policy-wise. And that's not something that you need to take personally. Like, that's something like learning these different policy informations, this info about these policies. That seems systemically racist to me, because the way the zones of these areas were set up back when, the other side of the tracks was designated for the poor Black people. You couldn't move to the other side of the tracks.
Yeah. Like they literally weren't allowed to move into the other neighborhood.
And so it's a poor place, whatever. So we're just going over the same thing. But it is something that, like, okay, so let's, like you said, if we locate the cancer cells in the policy, we like fix them, then we can move on to the next one. And like, that doesn't sound unreasonable to me. So I think that people need to read your article, which I will put in the description, and then maybe even read the book just to see like the nuance.
I recommend it. It's good. It has a lot of good information, but he's a writer. Lots of like evocative stories and good historical information that's really interesting. And I'm gonna read his other book, Stamped from the Beginning, which won the National Book Award. And that's, the subtitle is A History of Racist Ideas in America. So that will be very interesting. Maybe I'll write something else about that.
Maybe we'll be talking again soon. Okay. Okay, thank you so much, Rebecca, for this. I just am really looking forward to the feedback of a couple of white Canadians talking about Ibram Kendi's anti-racist book.
Yes.
White gals, a couple of gals. Okay. Thanks, Rebecca. We'll talk to you later. Bye.
Thank you.
If you would subscribe, that would be the bee's knees.